Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Breaking the Game here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. I'm Stephen Gillespie, and joining me is my fellow co-host, the King of Canada himself, Kenneth Cotterill. What's up, brother? How you doing?
King of Canada, that's a new one that I haven't heard. But it's not entirely inaccurate, I guess. So I guess I'll roll with it today. No, I'm doing well, man. Honestly, Saskatchewan Roughriders up here, they just won their Western playoff semifinal. So that's a huge win for our only local professional team that we have up here. And so while this is a basketball show, I have to give a shout out to them. But we had some great college games this week, some great NBA games as well. One that went to triple overtime even. So really excited to talk some hoops today, talking about not necessarily the teams that are rolling, but the teams that, you know, they're sliding a little bit. And that's kind of the theme of today's episode.
Yeah, slumping, sliding, falling down the rankings, however you want to verbalize it. We're discussing it today. We got some pretty unique, is that an appropriate word to you, Kenneth? Pretty unique teams that we're going to be discussing today.
Because people thinking, why are we talking about this team? Like, they're in the playoffs. Well, they might not be in a ranking that we expected them to be. So we can consider them sliding. Just because they're in a playoff spot doesn't mean that they're playing good basketball right now. So we're going to touch on 6 teams throughout that and really get in depth with them. And I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too, Kenneth. We're going to be talking about these teams, give a little bit of our opinions or insight based on what we've been watching as to what is causing or creating this. Maybe you get into some, how this could be corrected, or some coaches in trouble. We're just going to kind of have like a barbershop, style discussion today. It's not going to be too analytical or anything like that. It's just going to be based on the composition of these teams, maybe their schedule, maybe what's going on with their respective organizations. But it's going to be a fun episode, man. I can't wait to dive into it. But before we get into it, Kenneth, I know that you're the King of Canada, right? But tell us a little bit about what keeps the King of Canada fueling, throughout this grueling season of, football, basketball, hockey. I know you Canadians love, you love your hockey. What keeps you fueled during this time of year?
What a great transition to talk about Built Bar. I mean, Built Bar is the newest sponsor of the Off the Ball Network. If your kids find out how good these truly are, you're going to have to buy more. These bars have great flavors such as cookies and cream, strawberry, and peanut butter brownie. Built Bar also now has a mystery flavor. If you guess the flavor correctly, you could win a prize. All you have to do is head over to built.com and use the promo code OFFTHEBALL in all caps at checkout, and you get a 10% discount. And they aren't lying when they say how good these bars truly are. I find that a lot of protein bars, they taste chalkier. They don't quite taste right. These ones taste exactly like a chocolate bar. They're not lying when they say that. And so as the fiance and I get ready for our wedding and we're in the gym, it's helpful to have these protein bars there to help us fuel afterwards. So go check out built.com. Use the promo code Off the Ball in all caps at checkout and get a 10% discount off your order.
Yeah, I mean, you can't beat that. Built.com has a lot of great products. It's not just the bars. They have a lot of other great things. And we have other great things that we're going to be discussing during the show. We led you guys in with the slumping teams. First, what we're wanting to do is discuss Kenneth's power ranking. So if you're watching us, thank you so much for tuning in. You're tuning in live. For those who are listening, we'll run through a few of these teams. Kenneth, you got the Golden State Warriors, number 1. Right behind them are the red hot Phoenix Suns, the Nets, the Jazz, the Heat, the Bucks, the Bulls, the Wizards, the Hornets, the Mavericks round out the top 10. And then completely rounding out the top 15 are the Knicks, the Blazers, the Clippers, Hawks, and Lakers. So we're talking about the left side of the bracket, so to speak here, 15 out of 30. Those are your top 15 teams. What have been the biggest movers and shakers for you right now, Kenneth? And a little bit of insight as to why, without getting too much into the slumping teams, please.
Yeah, I mean, a big mover this week had to be Milwaukee. They're a team that's starting to figure things out. Even as we're recording, they were up big on Indiana the last time I looked in the fourth quarter. So I'm pretty sure they closed out that game. And that's them on a big win streak. And a lot of that was them getting healthy. And so they were a team that was hovering around the bottom of the left side. They never quite made it to the right side of the bracket, even out of the gate, because when you're making power rankings like these, you have to make sure that you're putting a bit of perspective on it. Like, did Minnesota win a lot of games and they're still on the right side? Yes, but it's all because of how they played earlier, expectations for them. So that would be a big mover, would be Milwaukee, the defending champs, moving back up the power rankings. A team that dropped a little bit was the Washington Wizards. They dropped a couple spots. I think they're just starting to come back down to earth more than anything else. So they were big movers. If we're talking about teams that flew up the rankings, Charlotte's been playing some good basketball.
Yep.
Portland making their first appearance on the left side this year. And then the Atlanta Hawks. You know, we talked about them a couple weeks ago as a team where it's like, let's calm down on the Hawks because they played one of the toughest schedules, a lot of road games. Now they're starting to get some of these home games and winnable games, and they're winning them. So that moved them over to the left side of the bracket. LA is teetering. I'll say that much. The Lakers are teetering at 15.
They've been holding down that 15 spot for a couple weeks now, Kenneth.
They really have. And, you know, they did have that loss in triple overtime against Sacramento that I mentioned. So that's one that's kind of tough to swallow. They did go 2-2 last week, so it didn't feel right to punish them too much by moving them down. But that being said, you have another week like that. We're going to have to start having these teams, like the first three teams on the right side. You've got Denver, Boston, and Minnesota. If Minnesota keeps it rolling, they're going to move over to the left side. If Denver can start to figure it out, if Boston can get back on a roll, then they're going to move over to the left side. So it's ever changing, minus the bottom like 5 or 6 teams. It feels like I'm kind of just swapping them around based off of like, okay, who got a couple wins this week, or who got a win is more accurate. Would be, okay, these guys got 1 win this week, might have to give them, like, talk about the Houston Rockets. They're in 30 right now. Well, they won 2 in a row, so we might have to consider moving them up, considering this could be their biggest win streak of the year.
Absolutely. I mean, and how could you not have Houston over the Detroit Pistons right now, Kenneth? I mean, this is like the biggest travesty that I've seen on your rankings here. But we'll go ahead and touch on 16 through 30 just to appease all of our loving fan bases that we have here. From 16 to 30, the Nuggets, the Celtics, the Timberwolves, the Grizzlies, the Sixers, the Raptors, Cavaliers, Kings, Pacers, Thunder, Magic, Spurs, Pelicans, Pistons, and the Rockets. So, Kenneth, just before we move on from your rankings here, who is the team that is most likely, in your opinion, to move to the left side of the bracket, and who's in the most amount of danger to fall to the right side here?
Danger to fall to the right side has to be the Lakers because, as you said, they've been sitting at 15 for a little while there. We'll get more into what their struggles in a little bit. If we're talking about teams moving to the left side, probably Boston sitting at 17. I mean, they've won 6 of their last 10, so they're starting to figure it out a little bit. We're going to touch on their slow start to the year in a little bit here as well. But, I mean, the team that had the biggest free fall on the right side was Cleveland. A lot of that had to do with injuries because when you lose Sexton, they just got Mobley back, and look at what happens. They beat Orlando the other night. So it's like having top picks playing games helps you win games or something. So Cleveland was the team that fell quite a bit for me. When it comes to the very bottom, as I said, like it's tough to get too high on teams when they're sitting on 5 wins through 20 games. So a lot of it does have to do with, okay, who went 1-3 this week? Who went 0-4? Who went possibly 2-2 to move themselves up? But, you know, if I had to mention one other team, it'd be Philadelphia because they're sitting at 20. I think if they get healthy, they could move up as well. But the whole Ben Simmons situation has obviously put a damper on their season to start, along with the injuries. So these rankings are ever changing. I mean, we're going to see plenty of movement throughout the year. As we get closer to the end of the season, they'll start to tighten up a bit. Like, we're not going to see these massive jumps that teams have been having. Like, I think Atlanta moved from being like 20 to 14. Like, those jumps aren't going to happen late in the year. So we just have to appreciate them now while we're only 20 games in.
Absolutely. So, Kenneth, that's going to wrap up our power rankings here, or your power rankings. You're the one that does all the legwork. You just let me ask you questions, and I'm really grateful for that because you do such tremendous work on that. So, Kenneth, why don't you go ahead and I'm gonna pass the show over to you. You're gonna run through the teams that are kind of slumping. We'll kind of oscillate here, so to speak. We'll go from one Eastern Conference team to Western Conference. We'll go New York, LA, Boston, Denver, Philadelphia, and then close out with Memphis. So, Kenneth, floor is yours for the New York Knicks.
Yeah, I mean, so we're talking about the New York Knicks, which a lot of people think, well, maybe is this a little bit too harsh? I mean, we're talking about a team that is in the Eastern Conference playoffs right now. That being said, they've gone 5-5 over their last 10. They got out to that hot start at 7-3, and now we're starting to see, some chinks in the armor, you could say, around this team. So I'm curious of your thoughts around the Knicks because we have a lot of Knicks fans at the network. We hear about the
Sure.
Knicks all the time. Like it feels like it varies game to game. Like some days it's like Julius Randle for governor of New York, and then some days it's like, man, get that guy off the floor. So when it comes to the Knicks, what do you think has been the issues that they've been facing over the last couple weeks here? Because 5-5 isn't bad, but when you have expectations of the Knicks being the 4 through 6 seed in the conference and they're hovering a little bit further down, what do you think the issue has been for New York overall?
Well, I would point to the Orlando Magic being one of the primary reasons for the Knicks having a little bit of a rumor has it that president of Off the Ball Network Chris Lebron is tuning in because his ears were itching because we mentioned
I
the New
think
York
the
Knicks.
second we said New York Knicks, it just sent out like the bat signal to everyone at the network, like, oh, Knicks are on.
We're promised we're not that type of show where we're just going to talk about how bad a team is doing. We'll talk about some areas that we have of concern for all of these teams, right? Not just the Knicks, but we're also going to give credit in some of the areas, right? Which I'm about to do for our beloved New York Knicks. Kenneth, by default, we have to like the New York Knicks just because of the network that we're on. But they have some really good players. We'll put it out there. Julius Randle is still Julius Randle this year. I mean, if anything this year, he has been the one constant, the one mainstay. And that was a player, Kenneth, coming into the season to where we were like, is he going to really be able to maintain that level of play? And he's answered the bell, even during this tough stretch where they're I say only kind of tongue in cheek here, but they're still, 500 ball club over the past couple weeks. And you look at some of the teams outside of the Magic that they lost to, that they lost to the Bulls, who have been playing very well. They lost to the Suns. They lost badly. I believe President Chris LeBron was in attendance for that game. But Phoenix is on like one of the best stretches that we've seen in quite some time, that kind of like similar to how Utah did the previous season. So the hot Suns, but they come back and they beat the Hawks who were on a run themselves and they put it into their run. So there's some things that you can really like about what New York is doing this season. The one thing that was the biggest problem for them last season, continues to be the same problem for them this year, is consistent point guard play. I mean, they added Kemba Walker on a very team friendly deal, on a deal that hopefully, Kemba can kind of revive his career on, but he's had a couple flashes here and there, but they don't really have an anchor at that position, which really hurts. Obi Toppin has been playing very well. Mitchell Robinson's been in and out of the lineup. Evan Fournier kind of in and out, but they don't really have a lot of consistency across the board outside, of Julius Randle. So, I mean, Emmanuel Quickly, I was expecting big things for. He's been hit and miss. They lack that consistency, and Kenneth, their defense hasn't been as stout this season as it was the prior year, and they added more offensive pieces. And when you do that, you do kind of stray away from what got you in to the playoffs for the first time in forever last year. And that's really been my biggest concern with them, is the defensive consistency hasn't been there from the prior year, and they still haven't really done anything to drastically turn around that point guard position. Although they've tried, you can't knock them for their effort in trying to add a point guard, because they did. So Kenneth, I'll turn it over to you. That's my assessment. I think moving forward, though, that the Knicks on their schedule, I mean, they have the Nets. That's going to be tough. They have the Bulls. They have the Nuggets, more on them to follow. And then they have the Spurs. So if they can just kind of stay afloat over these next couple games, I think that they'll get a little on another run here soon.
I do as well. And you look at I love looking at offensive and defensive rating. I don't put a ton into it, but I think it is a good barometer early on of where teams are at. They're 16th in offensive rating, which is probably where they were last year. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but when you think of New York Knicks basketball last year, it was mostly they were solid offensively. They weren't a bottom 10 team or anything. But then the defensive rating is 16th in the league, which it was not the case last year. They were a top 5 defensive team in basketball last year. And it's almost a theme with a couple of these teams that we're going to get into, of like the defense has just taken a bit of a dip. So some things that are positives when it comes to New York, they're starting to hit the three ball more this year than they did last year. And I think some of the additions that they made, like an Evan Fournier and having Kemba there and no longer having Elfrid Payton, really goes a long way in your shooting numbers. So you look at 3-point wise, they're sixth in the league in percentage and seventh in makes. So they're finally a top 10 team as far as hitting shots from the perimeter, which we know in today's NBA is of the utmost importance. So overall, I think, yeah, the Knicks are going to, I assume that they were going to be in that, 4 to 7 range in the East. They're kind of hovering around there right now. So I think, yeah, you get through that stretch with Brooklyn and Chicago. If you can pull out a win against one of those teams, I think it's a massive win. Denver right now, we don't know how long Jokic is going to be out, so that could be a win on their schedule. And then you go beat the Spurs, and then suddenly all is sunny in New York once again. So
you have the Pacers following that game. You don't really have a really big test until maybe the Raptors, depending on how they look that game. But ultimately, December 12th, when you have Milwaukee on your schedule, that's going to be what I would say. Like that's a prove yourself game is what I would refer to it as. Right? It's like, okay, you're going up against one of the higher end teams, not only in the NBA but in your conference. Like that's a game that you got to get up for.
And that's how I felt about that Atlanta game for them, because did they get up for that game more than Atlanta did? 100% they did, because they know that that's the team that beat them in 5 games last year. That's the team that, had their number in the playoffs. Let's just call it what it is. Trey went into New York and he was like the king of New York a couple nights there, the way that he played. And so for them to not only win, but pretty dominating win at that, I think it goes to show that this team has a lot of fight in it. I'd love to see them lock in more defensively. I think because they've added pieces like Fournier and Kemba that aren't necessarily defenders, it's going to take them a bit of time to figure out maybe the defensive rotations there and everything, but they need to at minimum get back to being a top 10 defensive team in the league. I think it's definitely possible when you look at some of the pieces that they have as far as defenders go. So that's kind of my thinking on the Knicks, is that I think they're going to be fine. Like, this is still a playoff team. But when we're talking about teams that are sliding, they are sliding based off of where they were at, 3 weeks ago. So we had to mention them. Heading over to the Western Conference, we got the LA Lakers.
Yeah.
Now, it's a team that had a lot of turnover in the offseason. They brought some guys back that were on the team previously. They brought in some fresh faces altogether. Some of them may or may not be on LeBron James' speed dial. Who knows? But when we're talking about the Lakers, they are a team that, they've struggled out of the gate. When you look at where they're at in the conference, a lot of people had LA finishing top 4 in the conference. They're currently sitting in 7th. They're at 10-11 right now. I'm going to let you take the lead on this one as far as your thoughts on the Lakers, because if you listen to the previous hour of Dash Radio, I went pretty in depth with Mo Murphy on Up in Flames about the Lakers, but I'll reiterate some of those points after Steven goes. So, Steven, what have you seen from LA? What's been your cause for concern with them?
It's taken them a lot longer, in my opinion. And look, this isn't strange to a LeBron James centric team, and that's what this team is right now. It's still LeBron James centric. It pains me to see it, because you want Anthony Davis to take the reins on this team, and you want Russell Westbrook still wants to be a prominent figure on this team, and he's had to, and listen, I'm not going to trash Russell Westbrook because he gets too much of that, in my opinion. Is he a top 5 point guard in today's NBA? No. Is he a top 10? Maybe you can start making a case for the bottom of that list, but he's still a force to be reckoned with. It's figuring out the pecking order. Something in the offense has to change, though, because it's just too clunky, and you don't necessarily have the best roster composition to kind of unclunk it, to coin a phrase here. You can't unclunk this offense with the way it's constructed now, and the contracts that are movable are going to be really hard for other teams to want to take on to give you a better player in return. Let's just say, how it is. But the thing is that LA does have a large part of their draft picks left. So there is a way to kind of sweeten any said deal. But even their most intriguing players that they have on this roster, Kenneth, they're on small contracts. So it's going to be hard to bring in a big fish, so to speak, with the roster composition. So what can you do differently? You have to look at having the offense run through Anthony Davis, although he hasn't been as efficient as nowhere near as efficient as what he should be right now. Kenneth, I'm concerned that, he got his ring and he might be just like the everything else is supposed to come along with it. He needs to take a page out of Giannis Antetokounmpo's book. Is Giannis won a ring, but is he satisfied? No, he always finds something else to be hungry about. And I don't see that in Anthony Davis right now. And for a team that isn't gelling, that isn't the best put together team, let's call it what it is, for as old as they are in way too many close games. I mean, if you just pull up their list of games that they've played, their last loss was in an overtime game against the Kings. They beat the Pacers in overtime. A couple days before that, they lost by 6 to the Knicks. They won by 5 to the Pistons. They got blown out by the Celtics. They lost by 7 to the Bucks. They got blown out by the Chicago Bulls. They win by 8 to the Spurs. They get blown out by the Timberwolves. So they're either barely winning or getting the break speed off of them, and they're in overtime a lot. I mean, they're losing to teams they have no business losing to, and the teams that they should be beating, they're barely eking out victories. So that's concerning to me. LeBron James is a mortal person, and I think that this season is finally showing that. Not that anyone should be rooting for that for him, but I know that there are people who are. But LeBron James is human, fellas. I mean, he's almost 40 years old. He's done this for a long time. There is a lot of wear and tear on his body. And as much as I do give him credit for changing his game, it's still, you need someone else to play equal to his level right now. And the one guy that you just paid to do that, Anthony Davis, we can blame Russell Westbrook all we want, but we know who Russell Westbrook is, and we knew who he was coming onto this team. That was the biggest concern, and rightfully so. But again, we see this with every LeBron James team. It's always the third option that gets the lion's share of the blame. Anthony Davis, in my opinion, deserves way more criticism than what he's getting right now. He's playing a tough guy with Isaiah Stewart. I don't want to hear it. I want you to show me on the court how dominant you can be. He's had listen, he's still a really good player. I'll put it this way. He's still a really good player, but he isn't playing up to his reputation right now or what he should be playing. Russell Westbrook is playing like Russell Westbrook. This shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. What's more alarming to me is the play of Anthony Davis. And Frank Vogel might be getting a little bit of a hot seat right now. And I don't think that that's fair because, I mean, it is because he's losing the team a little bit. Someone has to, rattle Anthony Davis's cage, but a lot of the assistant coaches now have moved on for better opportunities. And now this is Frank Vogel from Indiana all over again, or Orlando all over again.
This is what's so funny to me because when Mo and I recorded, it was not live. We didn't share notes before we came on the air. And you said almost exactly what I said on his show about what's the issue with the Lakers. It's not Russell Westbrook and it's not Frank Vogel because Frank Vogel, he's going to get the blame because it's a LeBron team and they'll never take the fall for it. It will always be the coach. Like we saw him fire a coach. Let's just call it what it is. He fired the coach in Cleveland.
David Blatt, yeah.
Yeah. Then they bring in his buddy to coach. Like, let's call it what it is. And then Russ is playing like Russ. Like this is what we knew he was going to be. Do I expect Anthony Davis to be shooting 16% from 3 this year? No. But here's the thing. He doesn't need to be shooting threes to begin with. Like, let's also. He can.
It doesn't need to be
he
the
can,
biggest
but he
portion
doesn't
of his
need to
diet.
settle.
Yes.
Especially when you look at he's shooting 51% from the field this year still. So like he's getting his when he's going to work in the paint, getting it done because he's so tough to guard down there that it's crazy. There's very few guys that can do what he does in the post game. And so this team just needs a reality check. They need to be sitting down and saying like, look, this is on all of us because LeBron, has he been hurt? But should he be getting into it with fans courtside? Should he be getting into it with Isaiah Stewart? It's a distraction. Let's call it what it is. It's he's getting distracted in petty things because things are not going the way that they should be in LA because everyone was talking about LA is the 1 seed or LA is the 2 seed this year. They're currently the 7 seed, and it hasn't looked good. We haven't seen Kendrick Nunn yet, which I wish we could, because I think he would fit really well into what they're trying to do here. And I think he could run a second unit that would be very efficient. But, in the meantime, they've got Talon Horton Tucker back. They've got Carmelo Anthony embracing his 6-man role.
Malik Monk has had a couple of good games.
Yeah. And so, Melo is competing for 6-man of the year. He's playing very well coming off the bench. But you got to be looking at LeBron and AD need to look in the mirror and realize, look, this is on us. We're the leaders of this team. LeBron's skills may be starting to decline, but we've still seen flashes of him be very good this year. We've seen flashes of all 3 of them play well together at times, resulted in some wins early on. I said I'd be worried at the 20 to 25 game mark. With LeBron missing some time, I pushed it to 30. But that being said, over the next couple weeks,
it's coming up quick.
You got to figure it out soon. And when we're looking at the upcoming games for the Lakers, you got Detroit tonight.
Yep.
You better win that game at home. Then you go back to play Sacramento.
After
Don't
they
care if
just
it's a
beat
road
you
game.
in overtime.
That's a team that just beat you. Go beat them. And then you've got Clippers without Kawhi. You got your rematch with Boston in LA. You got the Grizzlies probably without Ja Morant for that game. There's no reason that the Lakers shouldn't be going at worst 3-2 over this stretch, probably 4-1.
Yeah, I mean, you think that the Pistons, the Kings should be wins. You might take one loss to either the Clippers or the Celtics, hopefully. You should beat the Grizzlies, because we'll talk about them here in a little bit. And then you got a nice little stretch of Oklahoma City and Orlando, a good game against the Magic. And then you got the Timberwolves, which you would think that's a win, but they beat the brakes off of the Lakers earlier on, within the past couple weeks.
And that's where over these next 10 games or so, if you go 7-3, I think all is right. You're starting to figure it out. You may pick up a bad loss here and there. That happens in the NBA to all teams. But if you go 5-5 over that stretch, or God forbid below 500,
you
hit the panic button. Oof. you gotta be calling teams about, okay, we got to make a move somewhere. Like we have to find that, or we have
to dare you trade Anthony Davis?
Well, seriously, at that point you have to start considering all options, because as we said, we know what Russ is. He's been playing like Russ. Davis hasn't played up to his potential. LeBron's been getting into some petty things away from basketball that don't matter when you're a team that's the 7 seed in the West. So,
and they have fun when they win. Time. I mean, when LA wins, no one has as much fun when they're winning than LeBron and AD. But oh my goodness, man, it's pretty alarming, and it's funny. I mean, it's not funny, but it's ironic that we're surprised for the past 3 seasons with the Lakers, right? That they are where they are in the standings. But if you just go back and look, if you look at this holistically, this is about where you should be expecting them. For some, not for some reason, the biggest reason, you have one of, if not the best player to ever play the game of basketball still on the team. You still have a top 10 player theoretically in Anthony Davis. And then you add a former MVP on this team. We just let that, and myself included, I'm guilty. I had them my number 1 team in the Western Conference. I, for the first time in my life, put all of my concerns to the side and said, but LeBron James. And they're still right around where they normally have been, Kenneth. And I don't know why, even myself, we just turn a blind eye to the concerns and say they're going to make it work, because that's just what LeBron has done all his career. He needs help, man. For the first time in my life, I'm saying that LeBron James needs help.
Because this isn't Miami LeBron. This isn't Cleveland LeBron. This is older LeBron. And it is starting to have that feeling of the Kobe, Dwight, and Steve Nash Lakers, of the lofty expectations going into the year.
Or the Gary Payton. How about this one? The Gary Payton, Karl Malone. Yes.
And I said that about a month ago. This team early on felt that way. And Mo, funny enough, was the one who was like, no, you're crazy. You really compared this Lakers team to them. And it's but how can you not? You've got aging talent that isn't getting along. It doesn't seem like at times. LeBron and AD are all buddy-buddy, but you don't see a lot of camaraderie amongst the rest of the groups. So there is cause for concern there. There's still plenty of time to figure it out for the Lakers, but they got to start figuring it out fairly quickly, because if not, the Western Conference, like, I think it's, if I
Waits
go
for
and look at the
nobody right
standings
now.
right now, the difference between the 4 spot and the 11 spot is 2 games currently. So you can't afford to go 4-6 in your winnable games and then think that you can make up for it. We said the same thing last year. Where were the Lakers? Play-in game. So
Yep.
definitely something to keep an eye on. The next team we're going to touch on is the Lakers' biggest rival, I guess you could say, even though the rivalry, I feel like, died like 10 years ago, but I digress
How
on that
about ring
point.
count rivalry? There we go.
Ring count rivalry is what we'll call it, the 80s rivalry, and that's the Boston Celtics. And this is a team where we saw Brad Stevens step back as coach, went more into the front office role, brought in the new coach, and then they're sitting at 10-10. Now they have gone 6-4 over the last 10. So they are starting to figure it out. But I still think that they're a team that's sliding to an extent. So what do you view in Boston so far? What have you seen from them that you think they could improve on, or things that they're even doing well over the last stretch that they weren't doing early on?
Yeah, I mean, pretty close to 500 basketball, right? So we'll call that sliding because one, expectations. You have way too many good players on this team. You have way too many good players on this team to be where they are. Let's just put that out there right now. I mean, if you look in the Eastern Conference, you look at some of the teams that are ahead of them. There's no way, still, in my opinion, why the Boston Celtics should be 10-10 right now, behind the Cleveland Cavaliers at the 10th seed right now. I mean, there's just no way that they should be where they are. And they've lost 2 in a row, but before that, they were on a nice little stretch. And I feel like that's just where Boston has been all season long. And they're taking, a step forward, maybe a half step back. I won't say 2 steps back, but or how about just 1 step forward, 1 step back? They're not going anywhere, Kenneth. I mean, again, the last 2 games, today, they just beat the Raptors by 12 points. It was a good win, but before that, they lost to the Spurs by 8 points. They lost to the Nets by a pretty significant margin. They beat the Rockets by 18. They beat the Thunder, which you expect. They beat the brakes off the Lakers. They lose to the Hawks. They beat the Cavs. They lose to the Cavs. They beat the Bucks. They beat the Raptors, lose to the Mavericks, and beat the Heat. So lately, they're picking it up. We'll put it out there like that. But if we're looking at a team to where, what's the expectation? What's the reality? I mentioned all those wins that they had, Kenneth. They did all that to get to the 10th seed. That's a lot of work just to get to be at the margins of a play-in tournament game. Like, that's a lot of work that they have to do. They have a lot of work ahead of them, too. I mean, looking forward, they have the Sixers coming up, the Jazz, the Blazers, the Lakers, the Clippers, the Suns, the Bucks, the Warriors, the Knicks, the Sixers, the Cavs, who are currently in front of them, the Bucks. Their first break doesn't come until December 27th when they have the Minnesota Timberwolves, and they are kind of a tough team to read right now. So I wouldn't say their first break doesn't come until January 2nd against the Orlando Magic. That's a tough stretch of basketball, Kenneth, and they're going to go through this fire, and they're either going to melt or they're going to come out shiny and pristine like a nice piece of silver. This next stretch, Kenneth, is going to determine, in my opinion, just how good the Boston Celtics are, and it's going to determine who's going to be on this roster. I'm talking coaches, I'm talking front office, and obviously what everyone's going to be looking at the most, the players, Kenneth. It's a tough stretch. They're already fighting from behind right now, and I don't have the utmost confidence that even with a guy like Jason Tatum, even with a guy like Jaylen Brown, that they're going to be able to do a lot to move up the rankings. But I hope I'm wrong because I like a lot of players on this team.
Yeah, when it comes to Boston, I think one big factor of why they picked it up after their really slow start, Dennis Schroeder started playing like a 6-man again.
Yep.
Because, I mean, I believe that's his role. I don't think any team should pay him to be the starting point guard on your roster. I think his value is much like a Jordan Clarkson, where I love him being the 6-man of my team. He's 17-5-4 coming off the bench. There's nothing wrong with that. And so he didn't play today against the Raptors. He suffered the ankle issue. We'll see how long he's going to be out with that ankle issue, because if he misses a significant period of time, they're now going into these tough games that you're talking about. I think this falls mostly on the play of Jason Tatum. I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, the numbers look fine at 25, 8, and 3, but he's shooting 40%.
that's
Like
not pretty, man.
wings to me also 32% from 3. If you're a wing number 1 option, you got to be around 45, you got to be around 35 from downtown. He's underneath both of those. He's taking a lot of shots and he's doing it very inefficiently right now. Because when you look at Jaylen Brown, he's coming off a major injury last year and he's still 23 and 6 and
Yeah.
he's shooting 46%. Like, what more could you want from him so far this year?
6% may not sound like a lot to people who don't pay a lot of attention to that, but you're talking a 20-game sample size for a superstar. 6%, that's a lot of shots that he's making at a higher clip than the guy who's supposed to be better. And Kenneth, just real quick before you continue, I said that the Timberwolves might be the easy game. The Timberwolves right now are 7-3 in their last 10 games. They're 10-10, and they are the 7th seed in the Western Conference. So that first easy game would definitely be that Orlando Magic game coming up at the beginning of January. You're talking over a month and a half away.
Yeah, and they have to win games, and they have to figure out, like, Tatum and Brown. We expect them to combine for 50 points any given night. A really good night, you get 60 out of them. If they're going to be without Schroeder, they're going to be putting a lot more on guys like Marcus Smart. Al Horford's actually had a good bounce back year for
Horford's
them at
been
12 and
playing
8.
really nice.
He fits in well with them. We're talking about Grant or Robert Williams, whichever one of you wants to show up and contribute. I mean, they could really use your
Peyton
help there.
Pritchard
Josh
is
Richardson.
struggling a little bit more this season. Teams are
Yeah.
kind of figuring him out a little bit.
And I think part of Boston's concerns as well, last point before we move on to our next team, I think the new coach, it has taken a little bit of time
Yeah, Ime
adjusting maybe
Udoka.
to his X's and O's and such, but now you got to figure it out, and you have to figure it out against some tough teams. Yeah, this is a stretch where it could determine whether Boston's going to be in that 6 or 7 seed or whether they could slip to the 9, 10, 11 spot in the Eastern Conference, because you got to go 500 over this stretch if you can. And there's a lot of good teams in there, and you can't go on a big losing streak at this point. So the next team we're chatting about, the Denver Nuggets. And I think this is one that we don't need to spend too much time on, because I think it's more of an injury situation than anything
sure.
else. When you think about the fact that still no Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., I said this on Mo's show, he still wasn't playing good basketball before he got hurt, but he's dealing with an injury now. So you're without him for a significant stretch, possibly. Jokic, we don't know how much longer he's going to be out. He's been like a
Sprained
game
wrist,
time
yeah.
decision the last couple nights, so I assume he's returning somewhat soon, but it's okay to sit him an extra game or two to make sure that his wrist is at 100% before he comes back. But what have you seen from Denver? I mean, obviously we talk about the injuries, but what have you seen from some of the other pieces on the team?
I mean, even a guy like Dozier, who you think about as, kind of a nice rotational piece, energetic guard, defensive-minded player, he's even going to be missing time. So when you're missing starters, you want guys who have been in a system a long time to be able to come in and step up and play meaningful minutes. We're even losing some of those guys now. I mean, Aaron Gordon is not playing good, but I don't think that they have a clear-cut role for him defined without their star players that they're missing, right? So now it was hard enough for you to figure out how are you going to get Gordon to play alongside Murray and alongside MPJ. That would be the more difficult spot. But playing next to Jokic should make things easy. I don't think Jokic is a player that's going to hinder the development of chemistry with a guy like Aaron Gordon. But now you're thrusting Aaron Gordon and Will Barton in the spots to where they have to carry the team. Bones Highland, a guy that you and I are both high on coming into last season, Kenneth, as a rookie, you're trusting him a lot more. And we know that Coach Malone is pretty reluctant to play rookies meaningful minutes. Monte Morris, in and out, up and down. It's just really hard for this team right now. And you got to consider the fact that Jokic may miss the most anticipated game of the season tomorrow night, playing against Miami, the Jokic brothers versus the Morris twins. I don't know how much we're going to get into that, but he could be missing that game. They just lost, to the Bucks. They lost to the Blazers, the Suns, the Bulls, the Sixers, the Mavericks. Their last victory was against the Nuggets, was against the Blazers, and which was a pretty sizable win. I mean, almost 30 points. they haven't won a lot of games. They've lost to a lot of really good teams without their best players. I don't know how much analysis you can put into the situation, because they're missing guys, man. They lost 6 straight. It hasn't been pretty. Jokic even stepped up as a defender at times without guys being here. There's even talks about him being an all defensive player this season. The analytics guys, myself here, ding ding ding, that's me. Look at his numbers, and it's pretty hard to refute that Jokic has taken a step forward defensively. I don't know if I'm ready to put him in the same category as Rudy Gobert, but it's just tough. They're missing players. I mean, that's really it.
I mean, what do you do when you're missing a guy that puts up 26, 13, and 6? You can't replace that with Jeff Green and with Austin Rivers. And like, it's an injuries issue. I think actually they'd be wise to just sit Jokic tomorrow, even if he's at 100%. Just don't get into the whole Miami stuff.
Don't even worry about it.
Just don't worry about it. Sit the game, because he's missed time anyway. So what are they going to say, that he ducked them? Well, he's missed multiple games in a row. So like, he's probably just healing up. And I think it would be for the betterment of the team overall if he just took some time to really get back to 100%, because you can't lose Jokic for another stretch like this. Get him back to 100%. As I said, you take the extra game or two to make sure that he's 100%, and then bring him back, and then you can start rattling off some wins, because they were winning games when he was in the lineup, even without Michael Porter Jr. So he's that much of an X factor for them. Then we talk about go from the best center in the West to probably the best center in the East, if we're talking about Joel Embiid. But Joel Embiid's missed some time for Philadelphia as well. So
basically the Eastern Conference Denver Nuggets right here.
Yeah, and so that's why we're not going to spend too much time on Philly either, because when you're talking about a team that's 10-10, they're 2-8 over their last 10. But we know the reason why. Like the injuries are a big factor here. Embiid did play the other night. Oh, what did he put up? Just a casual 42-14 against Minnesota, where they lost by
play
1
hard
in
enough.
overtime.
He doesn't play hard enough.
He doesn't care. He doesn't play hard enough. Like, he's just a guy that just doesn't put in enough effort. He needs to have some more Ben Simmons in him, if you ask me. But
whoa, okay,
that was a low blow. That was a low blow. But they get their full roster back against Minnesota. Yeah, they lose by 1 on the road against a team that's rolling, but Tobias with 17, Maxey with 15, Seth Curry with 14. I think this team's going to be fine. It's not one that I'm overly concerned with. Just, when your best player's missing time, he's only played 10 games this year, and you're at 500. I'd almost consider that a big win for Philadelphia in a way. They're just based off the last 10 games sliding. So what do you make of the Philadelphia situation?
It's a tough read, dude. Like you mentioned, they're 10-10. They dropped their last 2, putting them at 500 basketball behind the Boston Celtics. So, I mean, we talked about the Celtics and how we had expectations on them and where they are. How more so were we wrong so far on the season for Philadelphia? I mean, granted, no one could have predicted everything that's been going on with them. But you look at their team, they're below 500 at home. They're a better road team this year, which is crazy, because that's kind of the opposite story of what it had been for the past couple seasons with the Philadelphia 76ers. And talk about a team being all over the place. We just talked about the Denver Nuggets. The Sixers beat the Denver Nuggets without Joel Embiid, but then they get Joel Embiid and Tobias Harris back, and then they lose games. It's really hard to gauge how good this team is going to be. They're putting a lot on the shoulders of a guy like Tyrese Maxey, because Ben Simmons still isn't comfortable with coming back to play basketball yet. We don't have to tug at that string anymore. It's just have to say it. Tyrese Maxey is getting a lot of time because Ben Simmons isn't around. Seth Curry has had some really good games where he looks like his brother Steph. And then he's just like, okay, I understand why this dude hasn't been a star his whole career. You know what I mean? Danny Green, we talked about the Los Angeles Lakers and how they're struggling with their age and everything else. Danny Green just got cooked the other night. I mean, a lot of people get cooked by Anthony Edwards, but still, I mean, a guy that's billed to be a wing defender, he was just a revolving door out there against him. So getting the consistency is really difficult. Poor Doc Rivers, he always inherits a team like this, dude. It feels like he gets an old team or an often injured team or both, and that's what he's seeing again in Philadelphia this season. you can blip again the Ben Simmons thing. Doc Rivers has a role to play in that. That's all I'm going to say. But still, I mean, Joel Embiid, we know he's playing like Joel Embiid. When he's there, he's freaking balling out. But you know that you're not always going to have him. Tobias Harris has missed games too, and you've elevated him from being the third best player. Although last season they emphasized him more as a scorer than Ben Simmons, but still he's kind of that third option last year. Now he's the de facto second option, and then you're like, just the rest of the cast is essentially your third best player, and that's a really difficult position to be in because if you don't have a pecking order, you have to feed everybody all the time to see, all right, who's going to be the guy today, and that's why Philadelphia is sliding to me, Kenneth, is they don't have an established, pecking order of importance on either side of the basketball right now, other than Joel Embiid. And when you have question marks, that causes concern. When you have concern, that leads to doubt. Doubt leads to losses, and that's what we're seeing right now with Philly.
Yeah, I think Maxey deserves a lot of credit for the role that he has played, given the fact that Simmons is out, because he's 18, nearly 5 assists, 3 rebounds. He's shooting 49% in his second year in the league. So he's stepped up in a big way for them. And I actually think Philly is way worse than 500 basketball, having Tobias missing 8 games and Joel missing 10 games. They're probably closer to that 7-13, 8-12 type range.
That's
and
half
then
their
you're
games.
in very difficult position in the Eastern Conference because we know how close it's going to be near the bottom there. So, yeah, I want to see Philadelphia healthy. They should beat the Magic tomorrow at home. That's a game that you have to get. And then we get a significant stretch of games over the next 6 where you get Boston on the road, Atlanta on the road, back-to-back road games in Charlotte, and then you get 2 home games against 2 of the better teams in the Western Conference in Utah and Golden State. You come out of that stretch at 500.
But they're losing at home too, Kenneth. You can't even count on these home games.
Yeah, you can't even really. Both of them. They would almost be better if they were heading to Golden State or Utah at this point. So they need to figure out a way to go 500 over that stretch, beating Orlando as well. So go 4-3 over the next 7. Then I won't be as concerned about this team. But now that you've Tobias and Joel back, you have to win those games. And yeah, it's going to be an interesting stretch over the next few games here for Philadelphia. But the last team that we're going to touch on is out west as well. They looked red hot out of the gate, and that was the Memphis Grizzlies. Over the last 10 games, they're 4-6. Unfortunately, we did see that they lost Ja Morant to an injury the other night, but luckily,
freaking sucks, man.
Luckily, it's not as bad as originally anticipated. Like, he's still going to miss some significant time, but they were fearing like season ender here. I don't think that's going to be the case for him. But, they pick up a big win tonight against Sacramento at home, 128-101. So that's huge for them. But, you're now getting back as the 8th seed in the Western Conference. You're now going to be without your star for a significant period of time. Some of these other guys are going to have to step up, whether it's Desmond Bane or Dylan Brooks or whoever else on this team. So what have you seen from Memphis just closing out the show here? And what do you think of them as a whole moving forward?
Well, without Ja, it's going to be really hard to win games, but you touched on the game tonight, Kenneth. They had 12 guys play 10 or more minutes. That's insane. When do you ever see an NBA team play 12 guys 10 or more minutes? I mean, you had Brandon Clark in 16 minutes put up 15 points. DeAnthony Melton in 18 minutes put up 14 points. Dylan Brooks had a point per minute, 21 minutes, 21 points. Jaren Jackson Jr. in 22 minutes put up 17 points. It's going to be really hard to keep that level of basketball up to where you're just going to have guys hit runs as soon as they touch the court. That's going to be really difficult. And again, what did I say about Philadelphia? When you don't have an established pecking order, you're going to have games like this where you're basically playing basketball roulette and you say, let's roll up these Yahtzee dice, roll the 5 and see who we put out there tonight and hope that they hit. Tonight they hit, and they played against the Sacramento team who's looking to turn things around. They have coaching change, things like that. They're 8-13 on the season. But if you look at the way that the rest of these games have shook out, they beat the Kings by 27 tonight. On the 26th, they lost by 32 to the Atlanta Hawks. So talk about a wide range of just total different outcome between both of these games. And that's what I'm worried about moving forward with the Memphis Grizzlies. Could they have a night where they look really good winning a game against a downtrodden Western Conference team? Sure, but could they get the brakes beaten off of them by a 7-win streak Atlanta Hawks? Absolutely. It's going to be really hard. Jaren Jackson Jr. has had some really good games, and then there's others where it's just like, yeah, is he a second best player on a team? Probably not. Is he a third or fourth? It's looking more likely. I don't know how many games you can expect Dillon Brooks to lead your team with 21 points in 21 minutes and also share the rock that, pretty decently with Desmond Bane. That's going to be interesting to see. Who's the de facto point guard on this team? D'Anthony Melton is more of an off guard, defensive-minded, slashing, capable of hitting a spot-up jump shot. But is he really a setup guy? That's going to be hard to see moving forward. So what do? Do you play Kyle Anderson as kind of, the point slow-mo on this team? Is that going to be the direction they go? It's going to be interesting to see who captains this team without Ja Morant. But moving forward without Ja, I really don't expect much, man. I think for every 10 games that they play without Ja, best you're looking at is 4 victories, and that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and what's concerning is when you look at overall where they're at, like they're going to be 10-10 now. Minnesota at 10-10. You've got Denver behind you. Like those are the 2 teams that I'm concerned about. Less so with Sacramento because of the coaching change.
Yeah.
And then the bottom 4 teams, we don't even need to touch on them because I feel like you're beating a dead horse with those 4 teams. But there's no teams ahead of them that I look at that are going to be sliding. They look like they have pretty established rosters. Paul George playing great for the Clippers, like an MVP candidate. You've got Portland that are healthy. You've got the Lakers, as much dysfunction as they have. They've got 3 healthy all-star caliber players right now. So, they've got to weather the storm here. And they said that this isn't a season ender, but there's also no timetable for his return. So that's looking like February. If I had to guess, like if you're talking knee sprains, like, and that may be best case scenario of getting him back in February. So,
and you got to protect Ja from himself, because Ja is a player that's going to say I'm good when he's not. Like that's the biggest thing you got to worry about with him.
Exactly. And so you look at this team and, they have to figure out a way to win games, and it might just be a battle of attrition where they're going 8, 9, 10 guys deep to try and beat teams, and they're just maybe playing a high pace and whatever else they're going to try and do to win games. But it's not going to get any easier. Like you're in the Western Conference, probably every other night you're going to have a tough game, tough environment to play in, and they have to figure out a way to win games. Otherwise, we're going to be talking about Memphis in the play-in game once again, and it feels like that's we're talking about beating a dead horse. Talking about the Memphis Grizzlies being in a play-in game in the Western Conference seems to be it.
You're beating a dead horse with a dead horse.
Yeah, maybe they should roll out the dead horse and maybe see if they can give him some minutes. But that wraps things up for Breaking the Game. Our slides episode as far as teams that, they're not in trouble yet, but, they have been on a bit of a skid, and, there might be more cause for concern with a couple of the teams we touched tonight than others. But it's going to be fun to watch over the next little while to see which one of these teams steps up and which ones maybe step aside for some teams that are a little bit lower behind them. But Steven, why don't you go ahead and plug all your socials and such, and then I'll do the same, and then we'll get out of here.
Yeah, man, this sounds good. Well, Kenneth, thanks for captaining the show today. You're the best, man. I'm really blessed to be able to not only do a show with you, but just to know you, man. You're just an overall good dude, and I love working with you. But you can follow me on Twitter at Steven G Hoops. That's Steven with a PH. Follow Breaking the Game on all social media platforms at BTG NBA Pod. It would mean a lot to me if you guys continue to, download the podcast and keep listening there. Like, share, subscribe, rate, and review 5 stars. It does a lot more than you'll ever know. And follow Off the Ball Network at OTB_network on Twitter, at Off the Ball Network on Instagram. We have a YouTube for Off the Ball where you can catch Breaking the Game. We're airing there right now. For all you watching on YouTube, much love. Appreciate y'all. But we have a lot of other great sports that air through that way as well. And Kenneth, you're on about 80% of them. So I appreciate all the hard work that you do for the network too. I'm working on a top 80. I actually have the list formulated. I'm developing the article right now, doing all the behind the scenes work that not a lot of people get a chance to see. But Kenneth, Thanks again, man. Love you, dude. Appreciate you running the show the way that you do. All that you do for the network, it doesn't go unnoticed, man.
For sure. And you can follow me on all social platforms at shooters_pod. Daily betting article on Substack. Go sign up. You get the emails sent directly to you. A couple good plays out there today and a couple still to come as well. So keep an eye out for those. And then, yeah, just go check out offtheballnetwork.com. We got a lot of great stuff over there. Serves all your sports needs. For those of you who tuned into the live show, we really appreciate you. And for listening on Dash Radio, be sure to keep tuning in as Shooters, my show that I host, is coming up right after this. And so continue to listen to the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. And we really appreciate all of you that listen every week. And we'll see you next Sunday.